My exercise is my cornerstone habit because I sleep, I drink water while I'm on it, I do mindfulness, I do breath work, I look at things I'm grateful for, I get early sunshine. I've ticked off most of the things off the internal pharmacy, and it's not even 7 a.m. yet. We can be in charge of our own body and brain chemistry. Someone with ADHD can't prescribe themselves medication from an external pharmacy, but they can take more notice of their internal pharmacy and the sort of behaviours that can improve our body and brain chemistry. Start with one element. Focus on maybe nutrition, hydration is the top. Having regular, well-planned meals, having 3 colours of nutrients, 3 coloured veggies. Protein is really important for people with ADHD because protein's a building blocker for dopamine.
Hello and welcome back to Smart ADHD. Today we're focusing beyond ADHD medication and onto how to unlock your internal pharmacy. It's great to be joined again by the amazing Monica Hassall. She's an executive function coach from Brisbane in Australia who's been helping clients since 2012 by blending neuroscience, mindfulness, and practical coaching strategies. Monica's work has been featured in Attitude and Attention magazine, and today she's here to share how understanding your brain's natural neurochemicals like dopamine and cortisol and your internal pharmacy, we'll come on to that in a little bit, can help you manage ADHD more effectively. In this episode, we covered a little bit of neurochemistry, but not too nerdy. And then we explored how sleep, nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, and even humor can play a huge role in improving your daily life. I think it's time to get on with it right now. Hello, Monica. Welcome back to Smart ADHD. You're back for more.
I know, dear. Yeah, can't keep away.
Well, thank you so much. You're dialing in from Australia. I believe it's Brisbane, Australia.
Brisbane, Australia.
A beautiful city. I mean, it's a long time since I last went. It was in the 90s, and I'm sure it has changed a lot since then. In fact, I think it's grown quite a bit, hasn't it?
It has. It's a great place. Yeah, would live anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to come back to Australia. It's been too long. But today, so last episode that you were on, you were going through your concept of the ADHD volcano, which helped us understand what's happening on the surface, what's happening underneath, why these things are happening. We talked a lot about executive function, the 7 core elements of that, which I found fascinating. If you're watching or listening, you haven't listened to that episode, do go back and watch that, because I think that's going to be really helpful for this episode where we're talking about our internal pharmacy. And so I met you in person last month at the International ADHD Conference in Anaheim, which was amazing. And you did a talk on your internal pharmacy. Now, it wasn't actually probably aimed at me. It was aimed at like proper professionals. But I found it fascinating because you were really going into what's happening in our brains and what we can do to help ADHD. So my first question to you is, like, what is our internal pharmacy and how does this relate to ADHD?
Well, we have our own body and brain chemistry. So let's go back to people with ADHD. When people have ADHD and they get a diagnosis, they may, most likely being prescribed some medication. And medications are really great for brain chemistry. Not everyone opts to have medications. Medications help about 80 to 90% of people, but it doesn't help everyone. And the thing is, that's what I refer to as the external pharmacy. And having coached a lot of people over the last 10 years or so, I noticed that some people weren't using their external pharmacy that well, and they probably weren't using their internal pharmacy very well either, because of the way that ADHD can impact people's performance. And by that, I mean people have their own body and brain chemistry that they have agency over. We can be in charge of our own body and brain chemistry. Someone with ADHD can't prescribe themselves medication from an external pharmacy, but they can take more notice of their internal pharmacy and the sort of behaviours that can improve our body and brain chemistry.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So we're talking about, I suppose, neurochemicals, what's happening in our brains. We've covered a medication on the show before. We've had experts on to talk about that. That's a whole other topic. And I know people will have different experiences with this, different views on this. Just to say briefly, for me, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I had loads of stigmas, issues with the idea of having medication. So I avoided that for a time. But now I'm using that. And it's been a game changer for me. But I have realized that, and people have said this to me before, medication is it's not the answer. It is maybe part of the solution, but there's all these other things that we can talk about. There's coaching, there's obviously exercise and sleep and all those kind of things, but also understanding what's happening in our brains as well. So if you're interested to know more about medication, do go back and listen and watch those episodes. We've got a couple of episodes on that. So how is this different?
Our medication, that engaging with your internal pharmacy is probably going to make their medications work better.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so for example, before I'd come up with this internal pharmacy concept, I was coaching a young man one time and he was 23 years of age. And he was saying, oh, I'm really tired at work. And I thought, what's your sleep like? He said, oh, I go to sleep at 2 or 3 in the morning because I've been gaming and I have to get up at 6 o'clock for work. So I just take extra medications in the morning. He was on stimulants. He would take more than what he was prescribed, which 1 is not what they're for, and 2 isn't good for you. And 3, he actually would run out of his script and wouldn't be able to access more medication because he'd overdosed himself, in the previous few weeks. So he no longer had medication when he needed it. And I figured out, well, he's not using his body and brain chemistry to make his brain work as best as it can be. So the external pharmacy can be great, but sometimes people don't use it the right way either. And there's a little saying in ADHD land that medications can help you focus, but not necessarily what to focus on.
No, that's interesting. So the other thing that just struck me, so I don't know what you think about this, but you mentioned in the last episode in the volcano about self-medication, and a lot of these things are not good. So for some people it could be drinking too much alcohol, smoking, drugs, or there's probably other things that's because we maybe have a low dopamine level, and we'll talk a bit more about that because I'm sure there's a lot of misconceptions about dopamine, but those can be areas, I don't know whether you'd call those external, or maybe we're using our internal pharmacy in a bad way. What's your view on that, and how does that come into it?
Well, I think it's the neurochemical or neurotransmitter dopamine is about pursuit. So if it doesn't have enough, it's hard to focus on anything. So people that like to be bored, typically people that actually hate being bored, so they will sensation seek maybe, or do something that's going to help them focus. So watching a screen will help them focus. Having some alcohol, sometimes people will look for illicit substances that calm down a busy brain. So I had an example of one fellow one time, and we were talking about dangerous behaviors. And he said, yeah, I would ride my bicycle down a set of stairs. And I said, oh, why would you do that for? Because I was quite surprised, and he said, oh, it's the only way I can really focus on something. Like he just was really wanting focus. So that's where that sensation seeking happens.
It's bizarre. I think people who maybe don't have ADHD will be confused about this. And the other thing I found about medication, like why would, particularly with stimulant medication, why would taking stimulants calm you down? But equally, like why would cycling downstairs calm you down? I mean, that's enough to stress most people out.
Yeah. It's, like I said, people with ADHD have different ways of showing it and different needs and different pursuits. But I guess, the thing about stimulant medication is what it actually does. I know other people have spoken about this. It helps more dopamine become available. Its mode of action is to block up reuptake pumps. So more dopamine gets passed to the other neuron. There's, between 2 neurons, there's a gap. And what medications don't give you more dopamine. Stimulants don't give you more dopamine. They make your own naturally occurring dopamine more available to you. So when you have more dopamine available, then the messages can get passed. You can focus on things that you need to.
Yeah, that's an important
big concept. It's a big concept.
Yeah,
it just makes dopamine more available to you, so you can focus.
Yeah, and so that's where medication can really help. So before we get into the neurochemistry stuff, which I'm really wanting to do, is it all in our brain? Is this, because this is what I think. You've mentioned like neurons and what's happening in the brain. How about the rest of the body? We presumably all of these, like, I don't know, is dopamine going around in our bodies, or is it primarily?
There is dopamine in other parts of our body, as there is serotonin in other parts of our body. And I'm not a biochemist, but I know it is not just in the brain. But also things like cortisol, when we're under stress, is released from the kidneys, and that message from that hormone travels to the brain to get the brain to do its job, to the heart beat faster, breathe faster, so you can fuel your arms and limbs for fight, flight, or freeze. So it is body and brain. There is a connection there. And ADHD is primarily it's about the fueling to the prefrontal cortex, so you can have that concentrate. You can have those. Have the executive function switched on so you can make those complex choices. So it's about dopamine availability in the brain, but we have it in other areas as well. So if we get nervous about something, that serotonin in the gut can be out of balance, for example. We get that sort of butterflies in our tummy or things like that. So it's in other areas, but when we're thinking about ADHD, we're thinking about fueling to the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'm going to say it now. I loved chemistry. I loved science at school. I did it, up until the end of school. But I know that not everyone is that interested in chemistry. Do we really need to know all this neurochemistry stuff? How does knowing about this actually help us with ADHD?
Well, I've got a good case study that I talk about when I do my internal pharmacy talk, and it's about a couple. And the male in the story, he's being driven by dopamine because he wants to get to football training after a busy day at work. But his partner has had a lovely day, and she's all chill, and she's having a cocoa, and she's really driven by serotonin and oxytocin. So there's a great book called The Molecule of More, and he talks about the here and now chemicals, which is the oxytocin, serotonin, the here and now stuff, but as opposed to the dopamine, which is more about driving. Dopamine is about pursuit. So you really focus on something outside of your body, whereas your oxytocin and serotonin are about being here and now and being calm. So it's really a great thing to be able to know, well, what am I being driven by, or what is my partner being driven by if we're in a situation together and we're not kind of connecting? So, brain and body chemistry rules out behavior.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not really sure how to ask the next question. It's all kind of jumbled up. But I suppose, so I was going to ask you, what are the stock items in our internal pharmacy? But I think it would be maybe good to understand, what are neurotransmitters, if that's the right word. So you've mentioned already a few. You've mentioned there's dopamine, there's serotonin, there's oxytocin, there's adrenaline, there's cortisol. Now I know some of those are neurotransmitters. Maybe some of them aren't. But can you try and kind of help with all of this?
A neurotransmitter is a chemical that transmits messages. Sometimes they're neuromodulators. So something like dopamine can modulate the amount of brain chemical going from one brain cell to another. And hormones are a bit different again. So the neurochemicals are all in the brain in between neurons, so that's an easy way to remember it. But hormones might be from one part of the body and getting released and have an effect somewhere much further away than the gap between two brain cells. So, that's where hormones are different. Sometimes these chemicals are hormones and neurotransmitters. So
okay, so it's probably
complex.
easier just to say neurochemicals, and then but some of them are hormones, some of them are neurotransmitters. So we've mentioned a few. I know this is probably I'm putting you on the spot here, a bit of a challenge, but can you help us to understand the roles of the main ones when it comes to ADHD, and then we're going to go into the internal pharmacy.
Yeah, well, I guess dopamine and adrenaline, those sort of things, they can help us with our focus. Things like oxytocin and serotonin can be more calming chemicals. We need serotonin to be a building block for melatonin, for example, which helps us get to sleep at night. So a big challenge here, particularly for women with in perimenopause or menopause, they have lower estrogen, and estrogen travels with serotonin and dopamine, so it's hard to think straight. It's also hard to sleep. So we need serotonin as a building block for other things as well. So there's a whole lot of cascade of chemicals happening in this body that we have. And if we can understand a little bit about them, that's going to help us have better performance. So for example, cortisol. We need cortisol to help us wake up in the morning. So it balances with melatonin. Overnight, we have more melatonin so we can be asleep. We need cortisol to be released in the morning so we wake up. But cortisol is also released in high levels if we get stressed. So that's released from the kidneys, and that has a cascade of effect to our brain to wake up, turn on the dopamine and adrenaline to, fight, flight, or freeze. So it's a great idea to sort of understand, well, particularly if you're talking about being vigilant, yes, I need cortisol to wake up. I don't need flooded in my body with a constant cascade of being stressful all the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I trained as a professional singer, and I remember being on stage, and that feeling of I'm singing in front of lots of people. There's an audience, there's an orchestra, a choir behind me, and what's going through my head is, why did I say yes to this? Why am I here? I'm starting to panic, and so I've kind of started to understand. There's adrenaline, there's cortisol, but in my mind, what I've always tried to do is to turn that nervousness, that I don't know whether I'd call it fear, but maybe it is fear, into excitement. And that has always helped me then focus and do my best job. When I've actually been in that state, I've done my best job. When I've been too chilled out, that's when I've given my worst performances. So I think there's obviously something going on neurochemically there, isn't there?
I think it's good to have some anxiousness around something that's important to us, because it kind of shows we care, because it's going to make us more alert and be more focused on what we can do. Yeah. So I think that's a great way of looking at it. I often speak to my clients, how do we turn sort of frustration or fear or nervousness about something into excitement? How do we flip that conversation? One of the things I like to do is with my clients is change the conversation around what they're experiencing, whether it's ADHD or the way they're feeling about something.
That's so important. So I was talking to your husband, Jonathan, about this. We were talking about the default mode network and the task positive network. And what I've come to realize is with ADHD, in the default mode network, we have an overactive brain, and we feed ourselves this narrative, and and often that can be quite a negative narrative if we don't actually feed it the truth or a positive one. So that's so fascinating. So the internal pharmacy, can you take us through that? There's the big 8. Is that part of that?
Yeah. So what I did was, I would talk to my clients about nutrition, hydration, and sleep, particularly. A lot of, notoriously, people with ADHD find it hard to get to bed at night because it's hard to organize themselves to get into bed, because they're interested in other things. So I sort of figured out, well, here's a list of things that we need to do, like the items from the pharmacy. And I've got it on one side of it, what I call a script pad. And on the other side is the simple actions that we can do to support those items. And I always start off with nutrition, hydration. Because we need that. Without 3 to 4, 5 days maybe without water, we won't survive. So nutrition, hydration is really important. And the next most important thing, which will surprise most people, is sleep. Because some people say, I don't really need sleep. Sleep's not that important. But sleep is the second most important thing that we can need for good brain function. And it's one of the most important factors for having good mental health, is to have good sleep. That can be really hard for people. After sleep, I have exercise. Exercise is great for our body and brain chemistry. And we think of it, if we're not getting enough sleep, we're probably not going to want to exercise in the morning. Then I have breath work, and there's lots of strategies that can particularly help us. It's a really simple thing to be able to do. And it's the thing that's going to help us most in those stressful situations. If we have too much cortisol and adrenaline, which is triggering our heart to beat faster and us to breathe faster, the simplest thing we can do in that moment is concentrate on our breathing. After breathing, I have mindfulness. I'm a huge believer in mindfulness. And I think next to medication, mindfulness is probably the next most important thing from a day-to-day basis. We can have medication to help us focus, but we don't know what we need to focus on. And for me, mindfulness helps us bring our attention to the current moment in a meaningful way. And ADHD is always about the point of performance. It's always about what's happening right now and how you're fueled for that. After mindfulness, I've got social and physical connection. Those sorts of things help with that oxytocin. I have stress adaptation and self-reflection. So I used to have stress reduction, but we're always going to have stress. So we can't really reduce stress in this world that we live in, but we can certainly find out how we can adapt to it better. We need to adapt to stressful situations. Then I have humor, because in really heavy situations, there's nothing that can alchemize the brain better than having some humor injected into something. And the last item I have on the internal pharmacy is the lens of executive function. So we need to be able to understand that. So typically, they're the things that I have on the left side. These are the items that we need. And on the right side, I have really, really simple things that we can do to help, improve that brain chemistry. And for example, I've got water, regular, well-planned meals. So that can be hard for people with ADHD because they find planning hard. 3 colors of nutrients, protein. And under those first 4, everything else is free. Early sunshine, exercise 3 to 5 times a week, early bedtime if you can. I know people will be shift work. I used to be a shift worker myself, and that was really hard. But, if we can get a good pattern of sleeping, that could be helpful. 1 to 3 minutes of mindfulness. There's lots of, mindfulness apps out there or tracks that you can get. 6-second hug. When appropriate, you hug someone for 6 seconds, and that can be enough to stimulate the oxytocin that's very bonding, that can help our body and brain chemistry. There's lots of really simple, free things we can do. We just have to know about them. And one of my clients said recently, he said, if you do most of these things most days, you can't help but feel better.
Yeah.
Simple changes.
Love the fact that you got humor on there, because I think we can be so serious a lot of the time. And I think we had 2 guinea pigs. Unfortunately, they died recently, which is very sad. And we were thinking, right, well, maybe we were not going to have any pets, because unfortunately, my wife is allergic to dogs and cats. But my daughter has been feeling, she realized how much she was getting from having a pet, just the stroking. And I think stroking and caring for it. So there's things like that as well. So we're going to be getting a hamster now. So there we go. But so there's a lot there. But I assume what you'd say is like, maybe kind of if you know that you're not doing most of those, then maybe focus on 2 or 3 to begin with and build that up over time. Would that be what you'd suggest?
Yeah, I think even start with one element. Just think, focus on maybe nutrition, hydration. It's the top. Having regular, well-planned meals, having 3 colors of nutrients, different colored veggies. Protein is really important for people with ADHD because protein's a building blocker for dopamine. So we need it to help create dopamine. So I don't know if you met Alan Brown over at the conference. He's a great ADHD coach, and he talks about carrying some dried apricots and some almonds. So you get some sugar, but you also get some protein. Great little snacks. So simple things.
That's interesting. So I'm obviously aware of time, but I wanted to dive into a few of those if we can. So, so you mentioned like diet or nutrition. So you mentioned one thing about protein, and it helps with the dopamine. Are there any things, obviously, so it's difficult for those of us with ADHD to sometimes to be organized and to get all those things. Also, the people with different diets, like if you're a vegetarian or whatever, that might be difficult to get that. But are there any kind of simple tips that you've got for us when it comes to nutrition to help us?
I think well-planned meals. Think ahead for the week. I had one lady say, and she had a couple of kids, and she said, I'd get to 5 o'clock in the afternoon and everything was frozen. So it was either going to take hours to do it or they'd have to get takeaway. So I think planning is one of those things, think ahead what you'd like. Even if you just focused on what you're having for dinner, as long as you could have 3 colors of nutrients, green veggie, a yellow veggie, a white veggie, something like that to make it simple. Keep it simple, plan ahead. I think that's the biggest tip.
I wonder whether there's some form of gamification as well to make it fun with the whole thing. I'm sure there's something in that maybe.
Yeah, well, one thing I do love is Insight Timer for mindfulness. I'm not sure. I know there's lots of mindfulness apps. So I like Insight Timer because what it does, it keeps a streak of how many days in a row you've done. And if you miss a day, you go back to 0. So I burnt about 165 by forgetting it one day because I attached it to my exercise. I didn't do my exercise this day. I didn't do my mindfulness. I'm now up to 770 because I am not missing it. I'm not going back to 0. And I only do 3 minutes. If I don't have 3 minutes, I'll do 1 minute. Because that's good strategy.
That's good, isn't it? That's good advice. It's like, reminds me of like Duolingo. I don't think I'm actually learning the language at all, but I'm going to keep that streak. So sleep is interesting. I think sometimes, so I've noticed like with myself and my mum, we sometimes use sleep as almost like a healing thing if we're stressed. So sometimes I think you can oversleep, but sometimes it's getting to sleep. Any tips on if we're oversleeping, or in most cases we're finding it difficult to get to sleep?
I think it's getting into a good pattern if you can. I mean, shift work that would be hard or impossible, but getting into a good routine, valuing sleep. And I think if you don't get enough sleep, I really absolutely love having a 10-minute power nap through the day, if I can. 10 minutes, it's like rebooting your computer in the middle of the day. But I would say set 2 alarms. You don't want to set it for 10 minutes. Yeah. I'd say 30 minutes at the max. Any more than that can interrupt your sleep routine at night, which is not helpful. But a 10-minute power nap, or some people call it yoga nidra, is quite incredible. You can be quite drowsy, getting to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're in a position where you can have a quick power nap, you have that nap and you come back later on and think, gosh, my brain is just normal again.
It's like rebooting your computer. And so I think a sleep mask is good. There's an app called Brain FM. There are similar ones which give you this kind of music that can help you do that as well. So breathing, breath work. So I'm trying to understand what you mean here. So I have an app on my phone called, I think it's called iBreathe, and it helps with things like box breathing, and that's helped me sometimes relax. Is that what you're talking about? And the second part of that is, I know it's a good thing, but I never do it. I mean, I've got it on my phone, but I keep forgetting about it.
Breath work,
and I
you
feel,
say?
yeah. So can you go into that and how can we actually do that regularly?
Well, for me, when I do my 3 minutes of mindfulness in the morning, I've got my app. So I will spend maybe 1 minute of that just practicing some box breathing. So box breathing is a great strategy. For people that don't know it, it's when you breathe in for 4 seconds, then you hold that for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you hold that for 4 seconds. And that feels a bit weird. The reason I come to know about that is when I was doing some research about public speaking, I would get nervous. And it's a strategy that the Navy SEALs, the US Special Forces, use box breathing so they can help reduce their stress response. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. So, so I think if you want to start a new habit, attach it to something you're already doing. So I'm practicing. If I get up and if I sleep well, I go exercise in the morning, I do my mindfulness, either to or from the gym, or if I'm in the park, if I'm going a walk, I do it in the park. I stop and I do my mindfulness. I practice my box breathing. I'm out early. I'm getting early sunshine. So some of these habits can be really quite key. Like my exercise is my cornerstone habit because I sleep, I drink water while I'm on it. I do mindfulness, I do breath work. I look at things I'm grateful for. I get early sunshine. I've ticked off most of the things off the internal pharmacy, and it's not even 7 a.m. yet, So, and that internal pharmacy, the reason why I created that checklist is my clients say, look, I know these things, but I'm not doing them. So I think if we can, I always think with ADHD, give me a reason. If you've got a good reason, it's going to help me with my brain chemistry. And having a little script pad for it, engineer the environment, help you remember to do it.
Yeah, no, that's really important. It's sometimes it's also like how do I do it? So I think that the breathing works. I find that app I Breathe is really good. It gets you to do it. I just wanted to ask you briefly about mindfulness because again, it's a concept that is talked a lot about, but it's something that will what is it and how do we actually do it? Because again, with the ADHD brain, mindfulness can seem quite tricky. It's something that I don't find easy at all.
Well, a lot of people say this to me. I'll say, look, I think mindfulness is a great tool. I go, oh, I can't do mindfulness. I can't meditate for 20 minutes. And I'm saying, well, I'm not asking you to meditate. I'm just asking you to do, bring your attention to the current moment for a minute. So, when originally, when I hadn't found insight timer, I would be looking for something to help me, earmark that 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And having a little app that can help you with that is really helpful. But I'm happy to share, and I've got a little slide that I use that sort of shows the difference between what's autopilot and where is mindfulness and metacognition and meditation, where do they overlap? They have some overlaps, but they're not all the same. But where they overlap is in focused attention. So really mindfulness is just bringing your attention to the current moment in a meaningful way. So you can do it as a little 1, 2 or 3 minute exercise, and that's like going to the gym for your brain. It only takes 3 minutes. But John and I use some what we call strategic mindfulness, and we have some little acronyms that we get people to use in the moment at the point of performance to help them, bring their attention to the current moment in a helpful way. So it's not the same as meditation. It's quite different.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask you about it because some people can be I'm not saying that meditation is bad, but some people it just doesn't really it's not what they want to do. I think that's really helpful. And that's fascinating. I want to talk to you for a whole episode on that as well. And then just the final thing, humor. What would you? How come? Because that's difficult to manufacture. I mean, I suppose you could. I mean, I sometimes find myself watching a few YouTube videos from comedians that I find funny, but mixing that with that connectedness and I know that when I've been with friends where we've all just been laughing on the floor is amazing, but that's difficult you can't really manufacture that, can you?
Well, I think luckily for a lot of people with ADHD, it comes quite naturally to them.
Yeah.
Because they have that impulsive, they say the first thing that comes into their mind usually. That's often quite funny or, other people might not say it. But I think it's one of the strengths of, the supercharged attributes of people with ADHD. They can really be very good with humor. They say the funny thing. And, if you're in a meeting and things are quite tense, if someone comes out with something quite funny, it really does break the tension. Or, if you are feeling a bit down, if you've got the time, maybe revisit, a half-hour comedy show that you like or a podcast or sit with a friend and watch a movie. It can be quite funny because it does, there's nothing, I think it's such a great feeling when you've been to see a movie or, you come out of the theatre and you've just had such a good laugh. It actually makes your whole body feel quite different. And that's because of the brain chemistry.
That's wonderful. Oh, well, we've gone on longer than I intended to, but this is so fascinating. Could you just leave us with what would be the one simple habit or practice that listeners can adopt today to start prescribing from their internal pharmacy?
I mean, I think all of them, but I think the most important one probably is sleep. It really probably is sleep, because it helps our body and brain chemistry the next day. It helps us make the good decisions in the moment. I want to say exercise, but because it has benefits of its own, but sleep. If you can get 7 to 8 hours sleep, that's going to be a great start. For sure.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Monica. Wow, it's been such an interesting episode. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise on this. You could, if you go to, what's the website again? Is it Connect ADHD?
www.connectadhd.com.
Brilliant. So
It's
you can
all
do
about
that.
connections.
It's all about connections. Thank you so much, Monica. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for plugging us into your ears or watching on the YouTubes. And until next time, I encourage you to be smart with your ADHD. Toodaloo.